When considering the perception system planned for Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMORPG by Visionary Realms, it's easily one of the most interesting, but also one of the most nebulous systems planned. Perception has largely been considered by the community to be a standalone system that falls into the category of a lore and storytelling vehicle for your character, with no apparent connection to combat mechanics, progression, or social value. Well, that was until the December Developer Roundtable, called The Art of Combat, with the game's creative director, Chris Perkins, and associate designer, Adam Mostel. It appears Visionary Realms has begun to connect perception to other gameplay systems. This opens up a lot of discussion and questions about how these connections will work, and one I'm very excited to explore. So in this video, I'll look at exactly what was said, and try to answer the question, how will Pantheon's perception system affect gameplay? A bit of background on the perception system first. The way it's been described, it doesn't neatly fit into some preconceived notion of a gameplay system we traditionally see in MMOs. Part dungeon master giving subtle hints, and part adventure game, the perception system was a lore lover's dream, looking for that immersive experience. VR did provide a detailed look at the perception system in a video titled Perception Storylines earlier in 2021. In this clip here, we're given the primary purpose of the perception mechanic.
This perception system is designed from the ground up to be a vehicle of immersion. It is designed to be the primary way, the crowning way in Pantheon that you engage with the world and the story and the setting and the meaning behind all things Pantheon. And with that in mind, you really are in many ways a product of your choices.
Keeping in mind engage the world is one of the tenets of game design, it certainly fits the bill. But what does that engagement look like in a gameplay sense? Is it a rewarding system in and of itself? Recall that the developers said the perception system was disconnected from experience gain and traditional quest reward structures.
And part of how we're achieving that is that we are removing perception from this leveling or reward-based paradigm that you would think of with, I guess, traditional questing, where maybe the only way I can get this item is if I do this quest, but if I quote unquote make the wrong choice or mess it up, then I've missed that chance.
The idea is that if you love the lore and the tale's terminus has to tell, the activity is the reward itself. A bold idea without a doubt. In the December Developer Roundtable, Chris Perkins informed us that they've been rethinking this approach to the perception system, and Adam Mostel said this.
So, when we talked about perception in the past, one of the kind of equations that we tried to make, as we refer to Sherlock Holmes, right? And this iconic sense of being an investigator, evaluating your environment, deducing clues, and trying to uncover stories and lore behind terminus. But that, when you think about that, that's can come across as a fairly independent activity, right? It's not necessarily something that is enmeshed within group play, enmeshed within adventuring. So there is another role that we have in mind when we talk about keepers when it comes to adventuring in a party. And that is the role of, an archaeologist or a scholar that's assisting your party through the knowledge that they bring to bear. The very first example that I gave of this was actually, I think of the Mummy movies, right? And you've got, I wouldn't even remember the character, right? But you've got, your older gentleman who's there and he's, got the scripts and the scrolls and the books and, without him, you wouldn't have that same story.
Yeah, I love it.
So without revealing much more than that, I can confirm that perception is being designed to have an intersection with adventuring and crafting, much like those two spheres already intersect with each other. I will just acknowledge that being able to discern certain dispositions and traits is one such example of that, but definitely just scratching the surface.
While this may seem like a development update that shouldn't get as much attention as class design, abilities, or the like, I feel like this is a pretty big change, and one I'm pretty impressed with, but more on that later. First, let's talk about the one connection that's been confirmed, traits and dispositions. The disposition system plan for Pantheon references mobs having a variable set of behavior conditions. The alarmist orc will notify friends before engaging in combat with your group. The cunning thief can see through your attempt to feign death and will kill you where you lie. Much has been said of how the disposition system will add a layer of dynamic adjustment to the combat so that spawns and camps don't become tactically static. Chris Perkins noted this system will be connected to the perception system in such a way that a keeper, a player who's developed their perception skills to a high level, will be able to identify these traits and dispositions for their allies. Here's what he said specifically.
There is such a depth here that, a system like perception that is so intrinsic and integral to the Pantheon experience. I mean, you can bet it's got some serious depth to it and breadth, and it is just scratching the surface. Lots of more details to come.
So, for example, your group is deep in Blackrose Keep, holding a camp spot with guards that spawn with a range of possible dispositions around you. It's a tough camp to hold to begin with, but without being able to know if one is an alarmist sentry or a cunning inquisitor, your fights are much tougher. But with a keeper, well trained in perception in your group, you have the advantage, and the camp is much easier. Which mob gets target priority? Do any need to be silenced immediately? And can we escape if needed? All questions you'll only be able to answer with a keeper at the ready. So this design choice makes a ton of sense. With the level of dynamic tactics traits and dispositions will demand, having a keeper in the group will be highly sought after with this change. It adds social value to an aspect of the game that was previously more or less a solo pursuit. It provides a reason that having a keeper in your group or your guild is important. As was referenced in the Dev Roundtable here, think of it like having a high-level crafter. So if you hate crafting and you need a masterwork sword made, you seek out that high-level crafter. If you aren't into the lore, but you still want to know if that giant spider you're about to pull is going to go straight for your healer or run from their flame, you now need a keeper. If you don't want to engage with the perception system, you have to seek out someone who has. The perception system got a ton of value added in December. This was followed up on in the January producer's letter, with news that a dedicated UI element is being developed to display traits and dispositions. Now, disclaimer here because VR didn't say this was connected to the perception system change in question, and is more speculative on my part. It may just be for the sake of streamlining how mob information is going to be presented. Take note that previously, a mob's disposition was displayed alongside its name. Perhaps now it just needs to go somewhere where not everyone can readily see it. Or maybe not. Remember, I'm just thinking out loud here. But we're not done here yet because Chris Perkins also mentioned this was just scratching the surface in terms of what they intend to do with the perception system by hooking it up to gameplay mechanics. So that gives us some room to speculate further on other ways we might see this happen down the road. While we won't go too deep here, there's certainly some obvious candidates. One potential aspect could be if it's about accessing otherwise hidden areas. We've seen VR's love for creating false walls and floors on a few occasions. Your group's keeper tells you they just received a perception ping, hinting at a sealed door only accessible to those versed in the world history. If you need to see the portal into the Isle of Infinite Storms, you seek out a keeper. Just don't blame the keeper when Sleepless chops you into little pieces one of these days. Given the likening of the role to an archaeologist by Adam Mostel, perhaps the perception system could assist with identifying an item's true character. Providing players with valuable item details upon the item dropping would be a valuable role in the group. That sword that you just acquired might be the key to your group taking on the next dungeon area, or it might be junk. Does that helm have a curse that will disable your tank? Without a keeper around, you won't know. If not stats, then mercantile value perhaps. Get your keeper to give a quick appraisal before leaving that loot behind. I could come up with more ideas, but like I said earlier, we won't go too off the rails with this, but the point here is to demonstrate how impactful the perception system could be if utilized to its full potential. And it sounds like VR is thinking along these lines.
And I just want to acknowledge the fact that this is an example where we are not blind, we're not deaf to the community's asking for information specifically regarding the perception system, and specifically regarding it and how it interplays with the other game systems as a whole. And so while this is not everything that there is to say. We've just kind of agreed that it seems like a good time to take a step further.
Like a lot of other things in Pantheon, there's some bravery involved in this design, but I think it's important not to minimize the value of these systems they've created. As a huge fan of the lore VR has published for Pantheon, even I felt strongly that the perception system had to be more than just a, if you're into the lore, you'll want to do this kind of thing. For me, I expect Pantheon to be a social journey, whereas the system previously felt like a solo expedition. What do you think of the perception system and the change that VR dropped? How could you see it being connected to a gameplay mechanic? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for watching.